Hello, everyone. If you're just tuning into this webinar, we haven't yet started. We've just opened it up, and thanks very much for joining. And we'll get going probably in about 30 seconds to 1 minute. We just want to make sure that everyone has had the chance to join before we get going. But you're in the right place. I'll be back in about half a minute. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar, Net Zero After the Energy Crisis, hosted by Renew Economy and supported by Grid Beyond. My name's Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor of Renew Economy, and welcome to this webinar. We've got three great speakers and a really interesting topic. We'll be hearing from Amandine Dennis-Ryan from IEFA. And we'll also be hearing from Lisa Bork and Ed Ahmed from Grid Beyond, looking at some of the major issues which are impacting on the energy crisis and what it's going to look like, how fast it's going to occur, and some of the obstacles and the issues which are emerging in its way, both on a global level and on a domestic level. So plenty to talk about, plenty to chew on. We do invite you to participate, as you will know from previous webinars. If you've been on this platform, you are very welcome to ask a question. If you please use the Q&A thing down the bottom of your screen. There is also a chat icon which people like to use, but we will be looking at questions on the Q&A. In the past, we've usually had too many questions that we can address. So with about 10 minutes to go, if it looks like we can't get to them all, then the individual panelists might actually hop on and respond, with a quick message or whatever. But please do put them down, and we just encourage as much feedback as we possibly can. So I think we're about to get going with with this webinar. We're going to start with Amandine, although I don't know. Do we have Lisa? I can't quite see what's happening here, but Sam, if we can welcome Amandine Dennis-Ryan from IEFA, who's going to give the opening presentation. Amandine, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Giles. So for those of you who don't know us, IEFA stands for the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. We are a global think tank with a mission to accelerate the energy transition, and we analyze mostly financial issues related to energy markets, trends, and policies. So today, for my presentation, I'm going to start with a short overview of the global and local context. As you would know, following the start of the Ukraine war, restrictions on Russian gas, fossil fuels experienced a massive spike in prices. European gas prices at their peak were 40 times higher than their COVID levels. And coal prices also skyrocketed as many countries tried to compensate shortages of gas with increased use of coal. So those high gas and coal prices were also reflected in really high electricity prices all around the world. And in Australia, the government intervened multiple times to try and rein in the increase in energy prices, imposing domestic price limits for gas and coal, and even suspending the electricity market when prices became unmanageable. Many countries also faced shortages. So, for example, LNG suppliers forfeited on deliveries to Bangladesh and redirected gas to Europe for profit, which led to massive blackouts in the country. Europe also had issues. They saw a lot of industrial demand destruction as energy-intensive companies could not afford rising energy costs. So that triggered a strong focus on energy security and also energy affordability across the globe, with many countries looking to limit their reliance on imported fossil fuels in particular. What it also triggered is an unprecedented wave of investments in fossil fuels, especially LNG. So liquefied natural gas. So LNG capacity worldwide will increase by 40% in the next 3 years. So this is happening at a time when demand is lowering in mature markets, and emerging economies are also considering whether they want to be dependent on imported gas. So now we're facing an LNG supply glut in as little as 2 years. The good news is that it means that prices will go down. The bad news is that it means that we're at risk of blowing the global carbon budget. So the IEA estimated that the locked-in investments in oil and gas are already sufficient to meet demand under the most conservative scenario, which is aligned with 2.4 degrees of warming, and twice as much what is needed under the 1.5 degree scenario. So it really shows that we need to limit as much as possible new fossil fuel developments. Another element of the recent global context is that supply chain constraints have become very visible in the last few years as countries have started to compete on who could deploy renewables the fastest. There's been in particular shortages of semiconductors and critical minerals needed to manufacture clean energy technologies. But there's also been other constraints on parts availability, transport disruptions, access to qualified labor, which have created delays and materially increased costs for renewable projects. Other concerns come from the concentration of supply chains, with China in particular dominating solar PV manufacturing, as you can see on this graph. So the red bars represent China's share of production. And governments are increasingly investing in securing supply chains as a result, and many are incentivizing domestic production. So in Australia, you'll be familiar with the Future Made in Australia a program which will provide financial support for critical mineral processing and clean energy technology manufacturing. But it will also be important to make sure that those investments are strategic, as competing with countries like China that have a much larger production scale will be very challenging. So in addition to those global challenges, Australia is also facing a number of local challenges. In short, everything is taking longer than it should and that it was planned to. Renewables deployment is currently constrained by the availability of transmission capacity, and the transmission build has been facing significant delays, in particular due to landholder opposition. Snowy 2.0, which is expected to deliver a large capacity of long-term storage, has faced multiple technical challenges and delay. It was meant to come online in 2021, and the latest estimate I've seen is 2029. And I think Florence, the boring machine, is stuck again right now. Connection processes are also taking a long time, and planning approvals as well. So this graph on the right shows the average time it took for wind farms to get approved in the last 5 years. In New South Wales, that was close to 10 years. And some of those delays are leading state governments to revisit expected coal exit dates, as you know, which will also contribute to adding uncertainties to the market for new projects. So now, in order to achieve the 82% target, we need to more than double large-scale renewables deployment compared to the deployment levels achieved in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, the recent challenges mean that we saw a collapse as well of the renewables investment pipeline last year. New financial commitments to large-scale renewables dropped to 1.5 billion in 2023 from 6.5 billion in 2022. And in particular, there were no new announced financial commitments to large-scale wind projects. So it's expected that the Capacity Investment Scheme, the CIS, introduced by the government to improve the financial viability of large-scale renewables and storage projects, will help get investment back up. So by now, I've probably made you all very depressed, but I actually believe that we can get back on track. And that is because there is a treasure trove and untapped opportunity. I'll start with distributed energy resources, or DER. As Dr. Gabriel Cooper, DER contributor, says, the small stuff adds up. Rooftop PV capacity continues to increase rapidly in Australia and contributed 11% of electricity generation in 2023. Last year, there was 3.1 gigawatts of rooftop solar capacity added to the system. That is more than large-scale renewables capacity additions for that year. And there is a lot more potential that is yet untapped. So what you can see here is modeling by ITP Renewables last year, which looked at what would happen if one suburb achieved saturation for solar and batteries. So what if every roof that could have solar did? And what if it was coupled with a battery? And what if those batteries could trade with each other? What they found was that it could eradicate the evening peak, which would massively reduce the cost to consumer and the required investment to the grid infrastructure. So we called it that it's putting the duck curve to sleep. We considered cutting its neck and then thought the sleeping part was probably a bit nicer. So in total, our team identified that distributed energy resources could deliver 19 billion in economic benefits by 2040. which would come from avoided generation and network costs. There would also be an additional $10 billion in consumer benefits from reduced profits at peak times, like we just discussed. So another opportunity is that heat pump-based appliances like reverse cycle air conditioners or heat pump hot water systems are extremely efficient, and they can deliver significant energy and cost savings. While they cost more upfront, the energy savings mean that they are materially cheaper to own over the lifespan. And despite this, we estimated that around 940,000 new gas appliances and 800,000 new resistive electric appliances are still installed each year. So that's nearly 2 million inefficient appliances that are installed each year, and they cost an unnecessary $3.4 billion in extra lifetime costs to households across the country. So this is the cost of delay, each year of delay to moving to high efficiency appliances. And in addition, we calculated that the energy savings delivered by switching to efficient appliances will more than outweigh the additional electricity needed for electrifying gas appliances. There's also an enormous untapped opportunity to improve energy efficiency and to electrify in industry, for example. So reducing electricity use would make the 82% target easier to achieve because it reduces the volume of renewable electricity that you need. And also it provides an enormous source of flexible demand. So electric water heating could be set to run in the middle of the day when solar generation is the highest, reducing minimum demand issues and acting as an energy storage system. UTS found that if water heating was electrified fast, efficiently, and made flexible, it could provide 22 gigawatts of storage. That's big, or 45 gigawatt hours of flexible demand per day by 2040. That's about 60% of the AEMO's forecast for distributed storage. And that would provide $6 billion of savings for consumers by 2040. However, there's currently no requirements for hot water systems to be made flexible, and the default setting is generally still for them to run overnight. Electric vehicles, or EVs, are also a potential massive resource for the electricity system. Recent analysis by NX for ARENA found that by 2050, the total battery storage on wheels in Australia will be about 4 times the total storage requirement in the NEM. So if we had vehicle to grid from only 10% of EVs, it could provide 37% of the total NEM storage needs and offset about $94 billion of large-scale battery storage investments at current prices. However, those benefits were not included in the cost-benefit analysis used to decide on the new vehicle efficiency standards. While we are facing delays for new investments, we should also look at how we can maximize the use of existing assets. So, for example, we recently published a report which looked at opportunities to maximize the use of existing hydrogeneration assets in Tasmania to hold water and provide long-term energy storage. So we found that large lakes in Tasmania seem to be significantly underutilized, with less than 50% of their capacity used in the last few years. We also found that the Basslink cable is often not used at its maximum capacity. So batteries on the mainland could likely be used as virtual transmission to help maximize its utilization. So if we did this, we could help increase the amount of seasonal storage that Tasmania provides for Victoria, importing solar in summer and exporting hydro in winter. There's also a lot of rooftop solar PV generation that gets unnecessarily curtailed and could add generation immediately if we implemented dynamic operating envelopes. And software solutions also exist, which can help networks maximize the use of their existing assets with better data and analysis. And finally, Green Energy Markets Project Development Database indicates that there's around 10 gigawatts of wind and more than 20 gigawatts of solar projects nationally that have planning approval, but are not yet committed to construction or contracted. This could go a significant way to support the 82% target. We will need more wind projects to get through, though, because solar will likely be of limited market value until we can shift more electricity demand to the middle of the day or increase storage. So now, finally, we need more government action to capture these opportunities. That won't be a surprise. We need technical standards for DER and updated energy efficiency standards for appliances. We need to stop selling gas appliances and to move to all electric homes as fast as possible. We need strategies for our hot water systems and EVs to ensure that they can support the energy transition and lower costs for everyone. And there's also still some work to be done to ensure a smooth transition, some challenges to address around supply chains and financing solutions, as well as making sure that we develop appropriate solutions for harder to electrify homes. There's also some fundamental issues in our energy system regulation and governance that need to be addressed. These systems were set up to support a centralized, one-way, baseload electricity system, and they're not adequate for the new system that we're building and need. So when it comes to the energy market structure and energy governance systems, it feels like we've been spending a lot of time and resources on designing a series of band-aids to address the most urgent issues with the current system, rather than focusing on how we can actually develop a new system altogether. But we can't wait any longer. We also have a report coming out on Friday, which makes the case for reviewing the economic regulation of distribution networks. At the core of it is contestability. Are costly network upgrades the best way to deliver the network service? Or could alternative solutions, for example, on the demand side, distributed solutions, deliver the same service at a lower cost? And then finally, we need to make sure that the capacity investment scheme is structured to support projects which are going to go to construction rapidly. And as our guest contributor Tristan Edis puts it, to avoid zombie projects. So we should create a race through oversubscribing tender rounds and making contracts contingent on getting to construction commitment. That will keep the pressure on tender winners to reach that stage as fast as possible. We should provide a standing offer that projects can access outside of the tender process when they reach construction commitment. That could help developers who might surprise us, as well as smaller projects, which could be a very good way to get around the transmission capacity constraints. We should make a condition of tender eligibility that projects must already have necessary government planning and environmental approvals to avoid significant delays, as we've discussed. And that would also make it possible to drop selection criteria relating to community engagement and social license, leaving that to the planning approval process and avoiding unnecessary duplication. And we should keep tenders on a national basis to put the pressure on states to compete against one another with fast approvals and supporting infrastructure. The CIS will also likely need to be extended to meet the 82% target, because it will support 23 gigawatts of new renewable capacity, but we will likely need 36 gigawatts to reach the target. So in conclusion, yes, there are challenges to the transition, but also there are multiple opportunities to accelerate the transition and minimize our reliance on fossil fuels. So we can accelerate renewables, small and large, as well as flexible, efficient electrification. And we should only look at delaying coal exits and expanding gas generation when there is really no other solution available. And that is it for me.
Hey, thank you very much, Amandine. That was a terrific presentation. Really enjoyed it. Some fantastic graphs there too. And yeah. Hey, look, just a reminder to everyone to, if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A file there at the bottom of your screen. And Amandine, there is actually, we're going to do the questions at the end, but there is one question here, and it's just about the heat pumps. You mentioned some of the problems there with the inefficiency coming in, and David mentions that while heat pumps are a successful technology for water heating overseas, the widespread adoption in Australia may be limited by the lack of agreed equipment standards and consequent import of poor quality products. Could you comment on the current state of play, please? If you've got a quick response to that one.
Well, yeah, standards was my number one request for government. So yes, there have been a few concerns, I think, on the quality front. But the good news is that we have seen a large increase in heat pump installation in New South Wales with the incentives of hot water systems, and in Victoria as well, with recently deployed incentives as well, and this is leading to improvements. For example, Solar Victoria has now made requirements of flexibility features and things like that. So there's still some challenges, but people are working on it and they're getting improved as we are learning and implementing the technology.
There was actually a terrific podcast, one of our podcast series, the Switched On series, focused on the heat pump issue a few weeks ago. So I do recommend that. There was an interview with Chris Taylor from Reclaim Energy. And I guess in many ways, it kind of reflects the early days of the rooftop solar boom in Australia. A lot of people with incentives and going for the cheapest possible option, and that's not always the greatest idea. So I think possibly there should be some learnings from that solar experience and to implement that quite quickly into the heat pump experience. Anyway, just a reminder, please do put the questions in. Look, we've got a second presentation. It's from Lisa Bork and Ed Ahmed from Grid Beyond, the sponsors of this podcast. Lisa, I think you have the floor, if not at least the screen.
Yep, thank
And
you.
you might need to unmute it. Yeah, yeah, there you go.
I'm just preparing my screens. Let's hope this is all okay. Hey, can you guys see my screen? Yep.
Yep. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So for those of you who don't know myself or Grid Beyond, I'm Lisa Bork. I'm the country manager here in Australia for Grid Beyond. We've been in operation in Australia now for coming on 2 years in July, but we're very much a global company. So we were established in 2010 in Ireland. We now have offices throughout the world. So we're in the US, Canada, obviously Ireland, UK, Australia, and Japan. We're also looking to move into other regions, and we're identifying those currently. In terms of capacity and what we do, we're a team of 160 people globally across all 6 regions. We currently have 2.3 gigawatts of load in our portfolio. We have 500 plus megawatts of batteries currently under contract. And we're consistently growing. In terms of the services that we offer throughout these regions, that includes activation, demand side response, installation, battery storage, metering, planning, monitoring, revenue generation, which is important, robotic trading, and artificial intelligence. In terms of what we wanted to talk to you, Ed and I about today, 5 key sort of areas. So climate change and net zero, key policies and agenda items, severe weather adds to growing concerns and how this impacts us. The action from policymakers is lagging behind. How businesses have the opportunity to make a significant difference, and also how can you realise these opportunities within your businesses. So some of this may sort of double up from Emma Dean's presentation as well, but it probably just drives it home a little bit more. So in terms of record-breaking temperatures, so in 2018, the IPCC highlighted the unprecedented scale of challenge required to keep global warming to 1.5%. 6 years later, that challenge has become even greater, with world record temperatures reported globally in 2023. So the IPCC synthesis report for the 6th assessment report concluded that human activities, which were principally through emissions of greenhouse gases, have unequivocally caused global warming, with global surface temperatures reaching 1.1 degrees Celsius above between the 1850s and the 1900s to presently in 2011 and 2020. It also raised concerns that the global greenhouse gas emissions have continued to increase, with the unequal historical and ongoing contributions arising from unsustainable energy use, and land use change, lifestyle patterns and consumption and production across regions, between and within countries, and among individuals. This impact was demonstrated in summer in 2023 as local heat records were broken across the planet. According to the NOAA, in June to August in 2023, the global surface temperature was 1.15 degrees Celsius above the 20th century average of 15.6 degrees Celsius. This also ranks as the warmest June to August period in the last 174 years on record, and 0.2 degrees above the previous record. The past 10 June to August periods are, in fact, the 10 warmest such periods on record, which is huge. Globally, in 2023, it ranked as the second warmest on record, second warmest recorded at 0.86% degrees Celsius above the 20th century, which is an average of 14 degrees Celsius. So key takeaways from COP28. We must conclude with ambitious outcome that demonstrates divisive action and a credible plan to keep 1.5 degrees as the goal alive. On the 8th of December, the new global stocktake draft text was published, which will inform the next round of climate action plans under the Paris Agreement to be put forward for 2025. The renewables and efficiency pledge seen across Australia, Canada, Japan, Ireland, the UK and USA were among the 118 countries to sign a pledge to treble renewables to 11 terawatts by 2030. The Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge was signed on the 2nd of December. The signatory countries recognise that to maintain the collective goal of the Paris Agreement, that accelerating the pace of renewables to deploy needs to be increased between now and 2030. A coalition of more than 80 countries, including the USA, the EU, and small island nations, pushed for an agreement that includes languages such as to phase out fossil fuels. On the 13th of December, a deal was approved that would, for the first time, push nations to transition away from fossil fuels. The UAE consensus calls for transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly and equitable manner so as to achieve net zero by 2050 in keeping with the science. It also calls for a tripling of renewable energy capacity globally by 2030, speeding up efforts to reduce coal use and accelerating technologies such as carbon capture and storage that can clean up hard to decarbonise industries. So essentially it's a closing window. For most countries already have targets in place for covering renewables, net zero and electric vehicles, but targets are not being met with sufficient action. The latest edition of the Statistical Review of World Energy found that back in 2022, and this is the most current statistics we have, carbon dioxide emissions from energy use, industrial processes, flaring and methane continue to rise to a new high, growing 0.8% in 2022, with emissions from energy using 0.9%. The pace and scale of what has to be done so far and current plans are insufficient to tackle the climate change. There are multiple feasible and effective options to reduce greenhouse gas and adapt human-caused climate change, and they are now available. So this brings on a growing need for flexibility. In Australia, we lead the global market for battery energy storage systems in terms of the total pipeline, which exceeds 40 gigawatts. It's a 2-hour grid-scale batteries are the most prevalent within this technology. So energy storage projects generally have a more complicated part to play in energy grid than renewable energy generation itself. Storage systems can fulfill different roles, for example, from short-term balancing of supply and demand to restoring grid operation following a blackout, to providing operating reserves of deferring investment in networks. Because of their fast response times, they are ideal for providing services such as frequency regulation and flexible ramping production. In addition, batteries can moderate the extremes in daily price swings through arbitrage by increasing demand for renewables during the very low priced hours of the day and increasing supply in the evening to bring prices down. Short duration is sorted, but long duration is required. However, multiple technologies are currently being considered. So this was kind of already covered in Emma Dean's, but we'll sort of push through. So further challenges to electrification include electrification of other sectors places additional pressure. Government's target for 50% new passenger vehicle sales to be zero emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2036, and I don't know how that's going to happen. Ancillary services and on-demand supply and demand reduction will become increasingly important. At COP26, more than 100 stakeholders signed a declaration to speed up the transition to 100% zero emission of cars and vans by 2005 to 2040. Interestingly, in the US, it took 8 years for the first 1 million EV sales. The IEA estimates that the EV market in the United States broke records in 2022 with just under 1 million light vehicle sales registered. In just the first half of 2023, it was estimated that over 670,000 EVs were sold, with over 80,000 of those fully electric battery electric vehicles. From 2014 through to 2017, more than half of all EVs in the US were purchased in California alone. But that fraction has now fallen, and it's more relevant in Florida and Texas being the second and third cumulative EV sales in the nation now. So shifting perspectives. 130 plus countries have committed to carbon neutrality. Net zero pledges upwards of 90% of the GDP and upwards of 88% of global emissions. We need the setting the target is just the first step alone. A shift in perspective from technological developments to taking advantage of flexibility needs to happen. When combined with enabling flexible technologies, this percentage was near 75%. In our recent research, over 30% of people we surveyed and responded saw energy flexibility as being the biggest trend in impacting the energy markets in the future. When combined with enabling flexible technology such as battery and electric vehicles, this percentage was near 75% of respondents. This is a sharp shift from levels 1 year ago, when just 22% saw energy flexibility as a key trend for the future. This trend is supported by a series of policy and regulatory developments in the market across the world as grid operators seek new and innovative measures to encourage flexibility in our power system. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ed to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right.
I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Thank you. Well, first of all, hello, everybody. This is Ed Ahmed, Regional Director for Grid Beyond in Australia. I'll take you through predominantly some of the actions in more detail that businesses are undertaking on the path to net zero. There are several activities that businesses are undertaking. It depends on where the businesses really are in that transition towards net zero. To state some examples, FCAS, frequency control ancillary services, peak avoidance as a starting point, and literally just dipping their toes in the water in terms of optimizing flexibility at the site. We've seen optimization of CHPs against energy price markets, gas prices. Another one is production optimization. So we would optimize the flexibility in the production plan itself. So finding that flexibility in the storage that may exist in the plant, and then optimizing that against the energy price and the high energy prices, and finding some flexibility that would be available for balancing the grid. Another one is, you'll see on your screen, solar and energy storage. It's a great way to decarbonize, and it's a good hedge against the energy prices. Businesses are also looking at corporate power purchase agreements as a form of hedging. And as part of their net zero, businesses are also investigating emissions reporting, looking at how much emissions are yearly, and we're actually moving on now from yearly to 24/7 type of reporting. And last but not the least, there is also the electrification of fleets and optimizing the fleet, where the fleet is being charged when there's an abundance of power available on the grid. That means the price is going to be lower when you're charging rather than when the price is really high. So these are some of the activities. Just wanted to give you a flavor that the businesses are undertaking these activities at the moment in their path to net zero. We'll look at some of the actions now from businesses in more detail in the next slide. So generally, businesses are getting quite active in terms of science-based target initiatives, SBTIs, and making commitments in the market to really improve their carbon credentials and reducing their dependency on fossil fuel usage. The techniques or the strategies that they're using at the moment are like renewables through corporate PPAs, or even looking at on-site solar or on-site solar with batteries. Customers are looking at optimization as well. If there's an optimization of efficiency to be made in the existing assets on site that they already have, should they be electrifying anything? Could they electrify heat, for example? Could they electrify boosters on glass furnaces? Could they electrify going from Bessemer furnaces to arc furnaces in the metals industry, for example? So there's quite a bit of electrification going on at the moment, and buying energy with renewables and obtaining these certificates are becoming important to trace as well. Generally, you buy these certificates, but ideally you want the certificates to be generated close to the consumption, so the power has a much better chance of getting to the customer site and is more relevant to the ecosystem of that particular country rather than some other country somewhere in the corner of the world. And the bigger part of that is probably the number 5, carbon tracking, which is being able to prove 24/7 that the power did arrive at the site and it did match the consumption at the site. And then obviously the EV optimization, which is basically reducing the transport companies' reliance on diesel or petrol and moving it predominantly to electric, and then the associated systems to make sure that a lot of power is actually coming from renewable sources. Now we'll look at an example. So this is an example where, from a customer's point of view, what can we do? What can they do? Or how does this all work? So this is an example where somebody who is only starting their carbon journey, for example, say initially they have 34% renewable energy coming off the grid and 66% fossil. And let's say they haven't made any hedging. Well, most customers would have hedged on fossil, but assuming that they haven't. And the first thing a customer can do is add grid energy with solar. So they might add solar to the site, and they'll give them a significant amount of, I mean, not a huge amount of coverage, but certain amount of coverage. It could certainly be more than what's probably showing over here, but it gives the customer also a certain level of hedge position, and it greens up the supply a bit. But then a customer may look at a corporate PPA, for example, with wind and solar, and that would green up the supply a fair bit, as you can see on your screen. It would also give a customer much stronger hedge position, so you could basically have a fair bit of energy hedged at that stage when they may decide to put in a battery, which gives them, I guess, much better protection against high prices in the market. So they would have had a really strong position in the instance, and they're mainly, at that stage, mainly running off renewables. Now, that customer, if you look at them, who are power matched, so if, let's say, they get called out by an activist in terms of what are you really doing on your side, they could be power matched 24/7, so they can actually say that our system is right there, it's fully auditable, and this is what we are currently doing at our site or in our business, and this is what we're currently achieving in the market. It's a lot more transparent. Moving on to the topic of how do customers fund their journey to net zero? So we as a business, we get involved in funding. We have funding systems. So we generate revenue for customers by getting customers to participate in demand response schemes, such as FCAS in Australia. Demand response revenues have the potential to fund a significant portion of the journey towards that 24/7 carbon-free energy. And with the use of AI and asset implementation, we can help unlock that demand response revenue at $0 capex upfront. And the customers might look at, where do we go from here? Okay, we've unlocked some revenue through demand response. What projects should we look at first? Should we do on-site solar, storage? And we want to do charging anyway, because we've We have been electrifying our vehicles or buses, and then what do we do with corporate PPAs? What would make sense? What's the right mix? What's the mix of solar, wind, batteries? So we are across that system basically, and we are here to help and to fund those assets either through unlocking revenue through demand response or maybe a funded battery, and take those customers onto that net journey, on the net zero journey. Now, how does a business actually deliver net zero? Let's delve that into the topic in a bit more detail. So a customer would, a business would start with typically with a demand response, typically. You know, and will find like flexibility in their existing assets through demand response programs such as FCAS in Australia, and putting that in the market. And also baselining the site, so looking at what's really going on at the site, benchmarking and finding any kind of efficiency in their existing process, squeezing those efficiencies out, but also then producing a type of plan of how to move forward and reduce the carbon footprint. Customers will also look at on-site solar. They could do rooftop or canopy, or there's land available to them to install ground-mounted solar. Does a battery make sense for them? Would heat pumps make sense moving away from, especially if you're optimized against tariffs? How does a business actually take all of that into account, and how do they, you know, take some real steps? We'll look at how businesses can actually transform energy into opportunity really quickly. So at Grid Beyond, I suppose we as a business exist to bridge the gap between energy markets, which can be quite complicated. It tends to be across three areas. As you can see on your screen, you'll see asset optimization, procurement and trading, advisory and financing. On asset optimization, I think I've covered a fair bit, but sites nowadays are getting quite complicated. There are more assets on site. Traditionally, there would have been, say, a CHP or a generator, one single asset, but now there are different types of assets on site. So you've got solar, you've got batteries. The customer might be also doing corporate PPAs. There might be EV chargers on the side. You might have electric heating as opposed to gas heating. And as a result, there's more sophisticated systems that are required to manage all of that. And then it's important to note that we also need predictive maintenance to make sure that if there's an equipment or an asset that's actually currently participating in these services, or the customer is actually bidding into the market with these assets, to avoid high prices, that they want to make sure the equipment is actually in good shape, it's actually working. So that predictive maintenance becomes really key. And then it comes down to procurement and trading, which I think we've covered a fair bit. Corporate PPAs, short-term trading, providing access to markets, and last but not the least, advisory and financing. I mean, we get involved in the whole design of the plan and advising customers on what's the next best action, what's the next best thing that they can do in their transition to that net zero on that path. And as mentioned earlier, we look at funding options, we look at financing strategies to be able to unlock ways for customers to actually transform that energy into an opportunity and get to the path of net zero. But that's all from my end. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me. Back to you, Giles.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you very much, Lisa. Look, we're just about to get on some questions, but Sam, I think one of the things I forgot to do at the start and in the middle was the polls. We do run some polls, so you might see a poll appear on your screen very soon. If you do have any questions, please do add them into the Q&A. But look, let's get to the first question. Oh, look, here we go. The first poll, more of a geopolitical one. You've got about a couple of minutes to answer this, and then we might get onto some more technology-specific ones. This one, I think, first one is from an anonymous attendee, but that's okay. Question is, why is the policy emphasis on shifting to green products, e.g. EV rollout, rather than simply reducing demand, e.g. public transport, which would have a cheaper and more immediate impact on carbon emissions? And Mondine, I think this probably also goes to something that Ed brought out with the demand response, and you also sort of talked about. So not just EVs, but energy efficiency and demand response has long been sort of regarded as one of the easiest options, but one that we just don't seem to be able to pick up and do. What are your observations about that? Amandine, maybe you first.
Yes, happy to go first. And yeah, I would absolutely agree that demand reduction, especially when it can be done without, a change in lifestyle, should absolutely be the priority, but it is not at the moment. And there's a number of reasons to that, but I would definitely say that cultural aspects are probably a big element to that. So we see that, in planning and policy, supply tends to be prioritized. If you look at some of the modeling that is done, for example, by AMO, typically they set a demand forecast and then they solve for it on the supply side, rather than looking at whether there are demand side solutions that could actually help, match supplies with demand. And things like talking about a gas supply gap. We've actually started talking about excess gas demand. So there's a lot of things like that where it's quite entrenched that demand is considered to be a factor, but not really a solution to be co-optimized. So we would definitely want to see much more happening on that side. It's also often perceived to be harder, which at this stage, I think is something that people need to stop, need to stop looking at it that way, because solving everything from the supply side is just going to be too hard. We really need to look at both at the same time.
Yeah, and one of the things that frustrates me, I think, is that often, these sort of demand side responses and efficiency often sort of, described as sort of, going without or enforced blackouts and things like that. And it's kind of sort of pollutes the whole conversation, just sort of gives a remarkable thing. Ed, I'm just wondering whether you've got anything to contribute to that. Just sort of doing a bit of a running thing on the polls. Thanks for your participation. Like more than 2/3 have already participated. And as you can see, pretty much half reckon it's going to be changes in government policies and regulations, which are the biggest impact on global energy trends. Then you've got geopolitical tensions, followed by shifts in consumer behaviour and technological advancements. That's interesting. And I guess it's probably what we're seeing in Australia. I think Amandine sort of also alluded to that, in that if we can actually get to this target, to this 82% target, it's going to need a lot of government. So there you go. Sam, why don't we just whack up the next poll while we did you have anything to add about this challenge with demand response? I mean, it just seems such an obvious thing. Energy efficiency, sort of non-supply solutions. Why hasn't it what are you seeing from your customers? Why hasn't it sort of been taken up as much as it should have?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. I mean, but the thing is, I look at that as education. So I look at that. I mean, we spend a significant amount of time, Giles, in educating customers on where that flexibility really is. It's not simply about just going ahead and maybe just installing a particular solution at site, like a cookie cutter solar or something like that. It's a lot easier. But in some cases, you have to look at in the real detail. You have to look at exactly how their production plans are. I covered that a little bit in my presentation. I look at where can you find flexibility in the production plan itself. So it's not very straightforward, I guess, and that's why I think it comes down to education. It comes down to taking that customer to the journey and showing them that, look, okay, this is how we've done it for customers over here globally in UK, Ireland, and US, and this is the way we've been able to do that for them. And let's try and see how we can do that for you. But it's a lot more involved, and there's a lot more work that goes in behind actually making sure that they have flexibility in their process.
Okay. Thanks everyone for leaping onto this new poll. We'll just get one more question before sort of discussing the results, but a fantastic response so far. This is from another anonymous attendee. Do gentailers Origin AGL, for instance, have a role to accelerate the transition And Wandine, I'm just thinking that this might be a topical question given the recent extension of the Eraring coal generator and the fact that Origin announced the so-called early closure more than 3 years ago, but didn't actually do much to fill the gap itself and kind of relied on others. And when they didn't, they got some money to keep it open longer. Maybe I've just answered the question myself, but Wandine, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to talk too much about the Eraring, extension. It's definitely a very disappointing
Yes, well, just
result.
in general, should they be doing more? Should they be doing more?
Yeah.
They clearly have a role, but yeah, are they
Yeah,
doing
they
nearly?
definitely have a role. They definitely have a role. And I guess on the more positive side for Origin, they actually have the largest virtual power plant, which is like a network of distributed energy resources that they manage. And that really shows some of the things that that gentailers can do, even on the demand side, where they can use that as to manage demand really, and to avoid building new capacity of, let's say, gas peaking or things like that. When it comes to the demand side as well, one thing that gentailers don't do that they could do is they've got all the data of consumption by households, and we know that there's very large variations, and some of the highest consuming households consume 2, 3, 4 times more than the average. And they could really intervene and help those households reduce their energy use through the implementation of better equipment, insulation, and things like that. So there's really a role to play there. And obviously just doing a lot of advocacy for government as well, and showing where there are opportunities to accelerate deployment and avoid extending fossil fuel generation like we've seen recently.
Yeah, okay. Look, this poll, 73%, that's 3/4 of you have participated in that, which is fantastic. Thank you very much. And look, the answer is improvements in energy storage solutions, the most important technological advancement in the energy sector. And I think that's probably a fair reflection. Well, it's 79% of people are putting that. Another 11% advancements in renewable energy technology, solar, wind, etc. It's interesting in that context that we've got the sort of the ultra low cost solar initiative in Australia, which is looking to sort of reduce the cost of solar by about around a third of what it is now, and then hydrogen energy solutions. And I wonder if that sort of reflects some of the skepticism about the hydrogen economy. Sam, maybe we can go on to the number 3 poll. The third poll. In the meantime, on the subject of energy storage, look, there's been a couple of questions about pumped hydro. Some people wondering about why we haven't moved quicker with pumped hydro projects. Look, Amandine, this might be another one for you, or perhaps Lisa or Ed, if you want to jump in on it. I mean, I'm guessing one of the issues with pumped hydro has been it's essentially a civil engineering thing, and the costs of that have sort of blown out. And I don't think Snowy Hydro has been a fantastic example of what to do with pumped hydro. I think governments are thinking about it, how to sort of more directly support pumped hydro. And then there's also questions from some people about, well, how much do we actually need? Anyway, Amandine or Lisa or Ed, anyone want to sort of talk more about that?
I'm happy to jump in with a short comment. So yeah, I think some of the really large ones have been facing, as you said, some engineering challenges, but there's also, we've seen reports from others like Nexa Advisory, who showed that the current incentives really work well for 2-hour, 4-hour batteries, like the short kind of storage technologies, but are not really adequately incentivizing the longer storage solutions. So that's probably something that needs to be looked at as well, that we might not have the right kind of incentives and market structures to incentivize some of those longer term storage solutions that are going to be needed as well.
Anybody else have anything to contribute about pumped hydro? Yep. Okay, let's move on. Lisa or Ed, I'm just wondering if we can ask you a bit more about some of the other premise things, the geopolitical intentions. I mean, we talked about how they sort of drove the energy crisis and the spikes in the gold and the cash prices a couple of years ago. What is their lingering impact, and what's the market concerned about now? Is there any sort of thoughts on that?
Lisa, you want to go? Oh, I can go ahead. Yep. Okay.
Lisa, Lisa, you're on mute. But anyway, Ed, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no worries. Look, we've seen the impacts of the Russian-Ukraine war on gas prices in the EU, and that's had a huge impact. And the way I see it is that there's going to be impacts either way, but I think in a strange kind of a way. In Europe, you see that there's less reliance on the Russian gas now because of the issues that they had with gas because of the war that was going on. That's actually moved their focus towards more renewables. So in a strange little way, that's actually worked out well. However, you cannot ignore that there are going to be issues with supply chain when you have wars going on, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's Russia, Ukraine. It will have impacts in the supply chain, so that will get affected negatively. So that's the way I look at it. That yes, they will be more focused towards moving towards more renewables, having less reliance on gas, but at the same time, the supply chain will get negatively affected.
Okay, Lisa, anything to add?
Yeah, I think just to Emma Dean's point earlier, just in regards to it just highlights really that we need to start to move more towards electrifying households and removing gas. It just sort of reinforces that part of what Emma Dean was saying earlier as well, more to Ed's point too.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, just an update on that latest poll. Once again, fantastic participation. Thank you very much, everybody. Not surprisingly, solar energy is the energy source cited as where we'll see the highest growth. I guess that's because it's probably the lowest cost at the moment. Wind energy comes next. It was interesting in that context that the AEMO and the CSIRO Gen Cost report sort of suggested that there would be further reductions, or has been further reductions in solar, but the wind energy will take some time to probably even get back to its previous levels. And that kind of goes back to the supply chain issues, which were highlighted at the start in a couple of these presentations. But maybe one more question.
Well,
I think
maybe I'll just point out something else as well, that it's cost reduction is one, but it's the scalability and versatility of a solar system. Like you can put a solar system at a residential site, but at the same time, you're putting solar panels at a utility scale site. So it's the versatility and the scalability, I guess, with solar that gives us a huge advantage. And cost reduction is one. The second is the technological improvements you're seeing in solar. There's 10 years ago, the kind of watts we used to see on the solar panels in comparison to what we see now, there's such a huge difference. So that when you put all that together, solar is definitely the winner.
Okay, excellent. Look, we might just have squeeze in two questions. One very quickly about why can't batteries are presumably sort of store for a longer period as a capacity. I'm going to take a little punt at that and suggest it's probably they can store for as long as you want them to. It's probably just about the economics of it. And the longer the storage period, the less income you will probably earn. And that's why we've actually seen a lot of short-term batteries because they've been sort of guided specifically at target markets within grid frequency control, standby for networks, which only requires 15 minutes or 30 minutes of storage. And we're starting to see longer storage, 2 hours, 4 hours, even going to 8 hours. It'll be interesting to see how much longer they will be. And there's also sort of different chemistries, which are also suggesting that that could be longer. So that's interesting. But one final one, and I think it's an interesting point, is because it's a common question. And I'd invite Amandine and Ed and Lisa also to comment. This will be the last question. Is renewables are talked about as being very cheap, and yet customers and communities are not seeing energy bill price relief. It is a complex issue. Why haven't they gone down in the last 20 years of increasing renewables? And when we'll get over this hump and communities will start to see the benefit. I'll just make two observations here. One, I'm thinking is that most of the pricing is still set by the fossil fuels, as we saw in the energy crisis, and we're starting to see. We saw this week, for instance, the first wind farms proposing to sort of actually do bill relief for the people in the local area. That's my 2 cents worth. Amandine, can you a quick comment just about why we haven't seen wholesale prices fall, or just maybe just retail bills fall as much as people would like them to.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, you hit one on the head. Like, I mean, I saw this graph once that showed electricity prices and gas prices, and there was a very, very close correlation between the two. So electricity prices at this stage are still dominated by, in particular, gas as the marginal producer. And there's the other element, which is the network costs, and that's going to be one of the things that we discuss in our report on Friday. But 10 years ago, distribution distribution network portion of energy cost increased by 60%, and that still hasn't been corrected because there was overinvestment. Networks invested a lot at a time when demand actually started to decrease, and we're at a risk of seeing that happen again. So I guess there's a number of different factors. We also found that networks are getting supernormal profits. They're getting last year they got 2.5 times their allowed profits, and those kind of things contribute to bills going up. And so we need more action to really make sure that we can minimize network costs, which are becoming which are going to are a big part of our costs, and that we can't compress too much.
Yeah, fair enough. Ed or Lisa, anything to add on that one? No. Okay, cool. Look, guys, I think we've reached the hour that we've allocated to this webinar. Look, thank you very much for everyone for attending and your feedback and your sort of eager participation in our polls and things like that, and for the questions. There will be a recording that will be available sometime in the next couple of days, I'd imagine. So apologies to the people who have asked questions right at the last minute. Haven't quite got to there. Look, thank you very much to Amandine and Denise Ryan from IEFA for a fantastic presentation, and also to Lisa and Ed from Grid Beyond for their great insight into the sort of the machinations and what's happening in the global and domestic markets. Thank you very much for Grid Beyond for sponsoring it. Thanks for all the people working behind the scenes. Some of them at ungodly hours in Europe because I decided to travel in the middle of this webinar, but there you go. But they've hung in there. And thanks, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar or back on the Renew Economy website. That's all for now. Goodbye.
Thank you.